Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Todd Klindt's SharePoint podcast number 293, barely recorded live on May 16th, 2016. I am your host and a much frazzled Todd Klindt. More on that later. While you're watching this podcast or listening to this podcast or reading this podcast or whatever you're doing, I encourage you, I implore you, go out to sharepoint.rackspace.com and find out about our glorious SharePoint products here at Rackspace. And then go out and check rackspace.com/Microsoft for all of our other Microsoft-focused products. And while you're out there, there's toddklindt.com, there's twitter.com/Todd Klindt. There's just all kinds of places for you and I to make a connection on the internet. So go ahead and check those all out. I'll be looking forward to it. Production notes. Well, 292 got everything out and then forgot to upload the RSS file. So that went out today, but everything else went pretty quickly. So that we'll try to remember to upload that file. Turns out uploading the updated RSS file is an important part of people actually being able to download it via RSS. So the YouTube one was easy because I could schedule that and that came out on time, but I will pay better attention to that. I need to get one of them their virtual assistant folks to take care of all this for me. The big news in production notes this week, though, is the last hour and a half. Those of you that don't watch this thing live, and it's recorded live Monday afternoons at 4 o'clock Central, 5 o'clock Eastern, 2 o'clock Pacific, 4 a.m. in Jakarta. So if you're in the Jakarta time zone, I apologize for that. And part of the joy, the fun, the frivolity of recording this thing live is the chat room. And for many moons, since the beginning of the podcast, 7 years ago, I've had a chat room, and they have been the heart and soul. The chat room hooligans have given me the strength I need to carry on some weeks when my will is weak. Seeing those eager little faces in there, they're like little baby birds looking for just little. And so I have to help them out. I have to do it, and I look forward to it. And so the chat room is very important. The hooligans are very important. So for many years, 5 years, maybe, I don't know, long time, the chat room has been hosted out of the Ars Technica IRC chat room. And that came from the fact that I've been involved in the Ars Technica IRC chat room, man, for 10 years, 15 years, I don't know, long time. And I had been using StickCam and some other things for the chat, and I wanted to get out of those platforms, and to get out of StickCam, I had to find another way to do chat, and IRC is, again, something I've been doing chat on forever. So I talked to the folks at Ars Technica, and they're like, yeah, you can have a channel, no problem. So it has been running there for the last, I don't know, however long, 5 years, something like that. So today, I was having some other problems with my machine. I normally have my IRC client open. Today, I'd rebooted a couple of times and I'd forgotten, and somebody piped up and they're like, hey, I think it was Lori, said, hey, I was trying to get into the chat room and it's not connecting. I'm like, I'll be. So I open up, sure enough, can't connect to the IRC server. So I poked around with some of my friends at Ars, and they're like, yeah, that server's down and we haven't got it fixed, and we're not sure what's going on. Internally, we've moved to Slack for all of our internal stuff, and I don't know if we care about the external IRC server anymore. And I'm like, well, Monday afternoon is a fine time for you guys to jettison that little number. So I wasn't sure what all I was going to do. So we've got everything set up in Slack now. I've got a Slack channel. We'll talk about that in a minute, how you can get hooked up with that. The funny thing is, if you remember a month or so ago, I was talking about how we need to decide whether we wanted to leave chat in IRC or if we wanted to move chat to Slack. I think we have our answer. I think life has a funny way of making those decisions for us. So congratulations, the chat room is now in Slack. So I have a Slack channel, toddklindt.slack.com. The downside of Slack is that you can't just sign up. You have to be invited, and there's no good way to open it up to just anybody to to make that possible. So I need to send you an invite, and I'll invite anybody. I invited Daniel Glenn. God, if I'll invite Daniel Glenn, I'll invite anybody. So what you need to do is you need to go to toddklindt.com/Slack invite. There's a little form there. I'm going to need your email address, your first name, your last name, the last 3 digits, the little security code thing on your credit card, your date of birth, and then your credit card number. And once we have all that, then I can invite you to the Slack room, and you'll get an email about that. And you'll be able to see that. So then you can either open Slack from your browser, again, toddklindt.slack.com. If you're on Windows or Mac, there's a standalone client. That's what I use for Slack. So you can get in there and you can join. I'm not sure if I'm going to leave this open all the time, because I know sometimes I end up getting people's questions in there, and they're questions I don't know the answer to and all that. But for now, that's what we use on Monday afternoon. So again, IRC is DED, dead. Thanks and so long, and thanks for all the fish to the guys at IRC. So I think that's probably not going to come back up. I've been trying to connect now all day, and it's not going on. At ARS, they've got forums there, and I left a note in the feedback forum about it, and it doesn't seem like anybody from ARS is taking care of it. So I'm thinking she might be dead. So, oh yeah, and Lori reminded me, apparently we need your expiration date on your credit card as well. So don't be shy, put that in there, and we'll get into Slack just as quick as we can. So again, toddklindt.slack.com, and then we'll get you invited. We got a bunch of the regulars in here now, and so this is good. So if you haven't used Slack before, there's a few changes. It's like IRC. You can paste pictures and YouTube things in there. It's very much a rich client. Another thing is the comments don't go away. So with IRC, I don't know what the retention was, and if somebody had a browser open, they were there. But in Slack, when you join the Slack channel, you see all the previous comments. So if you want to talk about how handsome I am and my movie star good looks and all that kind of stuff, just know that when you talk about that in Slack, everybody will be able to see it. And there's no good way to flesh that out. But looks like we got the answer to our do we or don't we Slack. Be great. IRC Slack Fiasco of 2016 has made that decision for us. Now we will move on to topics. One of the downsides of moving this thing to Monday afternoons as opposed to Monday evenings is I usually prepared a lot of my content right before the show, and I had a couple of hours to do that and kind of get everything. And so now I need to find time in the afternoon to do that, which is not horribly impossible to do. But then when you have this fire drill show up and you got to figure out what you can do for chat. And I'll be honest, for those of you that are listening to this in the chat room, when this first came up, we were trying to figure it out. I told Lori, I'm like, that's it. I'm scuttling this thing. I'm not going to do it today. She's like, nah, we can get it figured out. So I was just gonna cancel this one today, but we were able to get it done. But that took all the time that I was going to talk about preparation. So we'll see how today's podcast goes. So Mark Chrisman, I also want to say in the chat room where you misspelled tongue, you can actually, if you hover over that line, there's a little 3-dot ellipses. You can edit that, and I will be grading your Slack posts on both grammar and spelling. So go ahead and jump in there and fix that one. And here I'll mark it for you. So that you know which one it is. That's one great thing you can do in chat or in Slack is you can tag things and edit them, all that. Okay, enough about Slack. Let's talk about topics. So the big thing last week was the May 2016 CU family came out, second Tuesday of the month, like clockwork. And 2013, SharePoint 2013 had its CUs come out, and it's now build 15.0.4823. Not a lot of big changes in that one. I read through that, just a few bug fixes here and there, nothing huge. 2016 got some patches. 2016 does patching a little differently, and I need to figure out the best way to put that on my blog. So I've got those links. I just need the best way to do it. Obviously, you can go to SharePoint or go to toddklindt.com/SP2013 builds to get your SharePoint 2013 build goodness, toddklindt.com/SP2016 builds to get your SharePoint 2016 ones, and we'll get those updated. I just got to kind of figure it out. SharePoint 2010 had some patches, but the numbers were different. Like the numbers for the May patch were lower than the number for the April patch. So I need to investigate that a little more and break those apart and figure out what's going on in there. So we'll get those out there, but there again, not a lot of huge changes out there for those. The next thing that I wanted to talk about, and this is something that has come up in discussions that I've had recently, and that is around the Azure Active Directory Connect tool and sort of some finesse things about it. So if you're a SharePoint administrator, if you haven't already embraced your new job as identity master, you need to do that. 6 years ago, when I got in front of crowds and started talking about the new things coming in SharePoint 2010, I told them that they needed to become masters of PowerShell, or else they were not going to be able to continue doing their work in SharePoint. And as we can tell, 6 years later, that's absolutely true. You just have to have an understanding of PowerShell. Now we have added to that the idea of identity. To be a SharePoint administrator in 2016 and 2017 and 2018, you need to have a strong understanding of identity. You may not actually own identity in your company, but you need to own a good handle on identity so that at the very least you can talk to those folks about it. For SharePoint 2016 and 2013, with Office 365, if you're going to be doing any hybrid things at all, you need to get your identities in Azure Active Directory Connect, or Azure Active Directory in Office 365. And you use a tool called Azure Active Directory Connect to do that. You install that on-prem. You give it some accounts and it replicates some or all, however much you tell your local Active Directory, your Windows Active Directory, to sync up to Azure Active Directory. Now that we're doing this directory sync, there's a bunch of things that you as the SharePoint administrator and likely the Office 365 administrator need to understand. And one of them is how often passwords sync. And so this thing is something I had a discussion earlier this week about this. So there's a blog post or whatever on azure.microsoft.com about the Azure password sync policy and all that kind of stuff. So before February of 2016, Azure Active Directory Connect, when it did its sync, it did syncs every 3 hours. What that meant was if something about a user changed, it could be up to 3 hours before that change was reflected in Office 365. Email address, passwords, whatever. In February of 2016, they put out a new version of Azure Active Directory Connect. They tightened a lot of things and made it a lot more efficient. And that bumped the syncing, account syncing up to every 30 minutes, which is great. And the traffic wasn't too bad. It worked out pretty well. But another thing that they changed is in the background, they changed the password sync to every 2 minutes. And what that means is if somebody changes their password on-prem in Windows Active Directory, in 120 seconds or less, it will be changed out in Azure Active Directory. So they shouldn't ever see this thing where they all of a sudden can't get in and things are wrong. And so that's important because when you start talking to people, especially if you've got identity people and things like that in your company, this password syncing is one of the things that they really get stuck on. So knowing that that's 2 minutes will help make your case a little bit better. So another thing to keep in mind when you're talking about this to them is the password never gets sent across the wire. What Azure Active Directory Connect does not do is send that across the wire. What it ends up doing is taking the hash of your password, hashing it a second time, and sending that across the wire. So it's very secure. There's not going to be any people sniffing your internet traffic and getting your users' passwords, anything like that. So in the show notes, I'll have the link for this. The show notes are at toddklindt.com/podcast293. So there'll be a link there for that. But passwords sync every 2 minutes. Everything else syncs every 30 minutes. And if you make a bunch of big mass changes and you need to force a sync, the new Azure Active Directory Connect, the one that came out in February 2016, has a ton of PowerShell commandlets, and one of them will fire a sync immediately. So it's I think it's new AD sync connection thing, something like that. And that will kick it off immediately, so you don't have to wait the remainder of that 30-minute period. So that's some good stuff. This article talks about the security considerations, all those kind of things. Something, again, you may not be the one that owns identity at your company, but as the SharePoint and Office 365 person, you need to understand it and you need to read through this so that when your identity folks push back, because this is scary to them. Pushing your usernames and passwords outside of your premises is scary to your company. So you should read through this and understand exactly what's happening. Is this FIPS compliant, for instance? That's answered in here. But you definitely need to understand it. I liken it to SQL. You don't have to be a SQL DBA to be a SharePoint admin, but you need to understand it. You need to be able to get into a room with a SQL DBA and speak intelligently and be able to hold your own. And it's the same thing with identity. You're going to have to be able to do that. So read that document if you want to play with this. And if you're not comfortable with it, you need to play with it. Mostly you can do all of the testing and all the playing around for free. The only part that's not free is probably free. In order to do this, you need to have an Office 365 tenant. And you're like, but Todd, Office 365 tenants, they aren't free. No, but you can get a trial tenant. You can get a demo tenant for 3 or 6 months, something like that. And that's all you need. You can have one in a trial. So you need an Office 365 tenant. You need an internet-facing domain. So you need something that's internet routable. toddiscool.com, toddisthebest.com. They're all taken, of course, but they're examples of domains that you need to buy. That's the part that may not be free because you actually have to buy that. I get my domains at GoDaddy. I think they're $7 a year, so that's not so bad. The other thing is, likely, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably have a domain somewhere that you bought because you had the next great big idea and then never did anything with it. So that would be a great domain to use for this. And then you need a Windows domain. So you probably have, free virtualization software somewhere. You have a Windows domain that you can use to sync up there. So for the most part, you can test all this for free. Daniel Glenn suggests selfpromotingtodd.com. That's not so bad. I've heard worse. That's not a bad one. But this is something, again, you should do. I've done some webinars on this. I may do another one. The client's changed enough that I might do another one of these webinars on how to set all this up and get it all going. Food Bank Todd, good shout out to my Casey Undercover cameo last week. Food Bank Todd, I like it. Ross, toddismyhero.com. I can't believe that one's taken. I'm sure that one was, I don't know how long you've been able to buy internet domain names, 20, 25 years, something like that. I'm sure that was one like the first 8 or 10 that was purchased. But identity, if you have identity questions, if identity is something you're curious about but just don't know where to start, let me know. Shoot me a tweet at Todd Klindt. Email me, todd.klindt@rackspace.com. Identity is one of the things that I'm working with a lot these days, and so I would love to hear what your experiences out in the field are like. All right. So this was another thing as I was out cruising on the internet, taking breaks between funny cat videos. I saw this one and it kind of caught my attention. Is an article entitled Redirect Known Folders to OneDrive for Business. And this is an article about how to use GPOs, group policy objects, to our friends, that you can use to redirect things like, known folders, documents, whatever, from your local machine to your OneDrive for Business so that they get syncing out into the cloud. So I don't know that I necessarily recommend this. There's some caveats to what can and can't be synced with Office 365, file name restrictions, file type restrictions, things like that. Not as bad as it was a year ago, but certainly not 100%. But this is the kind of thing that as the SharePoint administrator, this is something that you at least, again, need to be able to speak intelligently about. Is it possible to get these files that are on our workstations? Everybody just saves everything to my documents. They don't understand. Is there a way to get this backed up someplace, get it into OneDrive for Business? Yes, there is. Let's get it out there. So again, don't take this as a wholehearted endorsement for the fact that you should be redirecting your documents, folders, and things like that out to OneDrive for Business. But again, it's just another feather to have in your cap, another tool in your tool belt when your business asks about that. That yes, there's a way to do it. There's a way to push it out with the GPO and do that. Now, one thing to keep in mind, and I think they call it out in this article, but when you set this up, it doesn't migrate any content. So if you've got users who have content in documents and you're going to push this out, it's going to change where that link goes, but all those documents are still going to be saved in C, users, whoever documents. So make sure that you know that, and when they start asking about where things have gone, you can tell them how to get into those documents so they can copy them out. But again, just a good thing to have, a good thing to know how to be able to do for the SharePoint administrator. I'm always looking out for you guys, and I see this kind of cool stuff, and I like it. All right, so this last topic, I nearly did not add to the notes. I nearly did not want to bring this topic up. There will be some backlash to this. There will be much gnashing of teeth. Fortunately, we've got a few folks in the chat room right now, and I think it will probably erupt immediately once I start talking about it. But I feel that it's an important topic to cover. And again, it'll be very controversial. I know that it will, but I think I need to talk about it. And that is something that was discussed a couple weeks ago at the Future of SharePoint event. It's the SharePoint Framework. For those of you that kind of got lost, there was a whole lot of things that were talked about at that event. The SharePoint Framework is a new way for SharePoint developers to write things for SharePoint, write web parts, add functionality to SharePoint. So it is a decidedly developer-y topic. Absolutely. So, and that's why I knew that it would just, there would be an eruption. People would be upset, and I know that, but it's something that I need to discuss. The reason, and so there's a bunch of things out there about it. The article that kind of inspired me to do this was Mark Anderson. So you can find his blog at SympMarc, SYMPMARC. And that's way more work to say than Mark is worth, but sympmarc.com. He's got his blog out there, and this is a SharePoint Framework initial questions and answers. So on the on May the 4th, when we were out there, Microsoft started talking about this SharePoint framework, and it's again another development framework for SharePoint. And Mark has been a developer, but not like a farm solution kind of developer. He's got the SP services and all that. He likes to consider himself like a middleware kind of guy, not really a user, not really a developer. He kind of sits in the middle. And this was something I liked his take on this. There's a lot of pieces of this that just had a lot of common sense. So when I've seen some of the initial discussions on the SharePoint framework, and a lot of developers like, oh my God, we have to, they're changing everything on us again. First it was farm code, then it was sandbox solutions, then it was SharePoint apps, and then it was SharePoint add-ins, which I think were still SharePoint apps. And now we've got this other thing. And so I liked Mark's approach to this. It was very even-tempered. So his first question, it was kind of a Q&A thing. Is this another development model? Yes, it is, but it's another development option. We didn't lose anything. So much like sandbox solutions were something that Microsoft suggested for like 37 minutes in the spring of 2010, but yet they're still fully supported. Nothing has been taken away. So all of the ways that you could develop against SharePoint a year ago, 3 years ago, they all still work. They're all still there. Now there's another option, and it's a newer option. It's in line with what's going on, and I think it's good because it's keeping in line with where the industry's going, where web things are going, and so there's a couple of reasons why that is an important thing. So one is that SharePoint developers are tough to find. And part of that was because it was a very specialized set of skills. You had to know how to develop for SharePoint. And you get a lot of ASP.NET developers who were close to that skill set, but then you dropped them into SharePoint and everything was different. And so the fact that SharePoint is adding an option that is similar to what other responsive web page things are doing, that's good for businesses because that opens up the pool of developers, and it's less ramping up when developers, you need you bring developers on, things like that. But it doesn't replace what you've already got in place. And so Daniel Glenn was at SharePoint Saturday Nashville. Hell, he probably was the guy that birthed SharePoint Saturday Nashville. Jeff Teeper stopped out there and he offered some guidance on that. And I think it sounds like, the development story for SharePoint wasn't great. And so the SharePoint framework is a way to mend some of those things. So it's not bad. It's just another option. Another thing that Mark covers in his thing is, can't we just do this stuff in a content editor web part? And his answer is, yeah. And a bunch of people have been doing it for a while and doing all kinds of crazy things. But this is not the Wild West. Now we've got a way to do this that is, well documented and well understood. And the other thing is that the SharePoint product group is going to be using this for all the things that they write. And that hasn't always been the case. There was always some concern that the way Microsoft bolted their things into SharePoint, they had some backdoors and they had some way to do things that your average developer on the street couldn't do. That's not the case anymore. They're going to be using the same framework. So that's good. When there's pain points that come up, limitations, they will feel them as well, and they'll be able to address them. But also then when you write things, they will look the same way that Microsoft's does, and all that. So that's a good thing. And this was another piece that I really liked, and it's very applicable to today's IRC Slack thing. Another one of his questions is, won't this just be replaced by another model in a few years? And his response is, yes, it absolutely will, because everything is eventually replaced sooner or later. So we could have had the same discussion 5 years ago when I moved everything to IRC. They're like, we're moving to IRC. Isn't this just going to get replaced? Yeah, eventually. Everything gets replaced eventually. And so everything, there's always iterations, there's always improvements. And like Lori says in the chat room, 5 years ago, we probably won't, or 5 years from now, we probably won't be on Slack. So the fact that it is different is not necessarily a bad thing. It's marching forward, and everything marches forward. So again, as an admin, this is important for you to understand, because developers are going to want to write code against your farms, and you need to. Right now, the SharePoint framework is only available in SharePoint Online, so Office 365. But there's some discussion about whether it will end up in SharePoint On-Prem or not. I think Mark even covers that in his thing. But your developers will want to run different kinds of code, and it's good for you to be able to push them in the right direction and get them doing the right things. And then once this is available on-prem, it'll be increasingly more difficult for them to destroy your stuff. In the chat room, we got a question: will they give us better tools to build solutions without having to learn a bunch of development skills? The good news about this framework is that it's all JavaScript. And that's and Mark has the question, what do I need to do to get up to speed? Learn JavaScript. And that's what it is, JavaScript. And so that's part of why this is good for the industry, because there's a lot of people out there that know JavaScript. So if you don't know JavaScript, then that's the thing. And he's even got a link in here to some videos on that. So, and then I like it at the end. What's SharePoint's future? And he's got a pair of sunglasses. The future's so bright, we got to wear shades. So this is all good stuff, and I'm glad that Mark wrote it because it helps kind of frame where things are going for us. Admins, we know what's going to be coming on. So I like that. The framework is something that we can't necessarily avoid. So the other thing is, if we see references to SPF, it no longer is SharePoint Foundation. It's probably SharePoint Framework. So chat room, everybody's chatting about that. We'll have some discussions. I'll stick around in the chat room for a while afterwards. Yep. So there we go. Okay. And I might have to learn a little bit of JavaScript just to stay topical. We'll see. On to shameless self-promotion. So I've been teasing you all with the fact that I may or may not be doing the Oklahoma City SharePoint user group in June. I got an email today from Bruce. I will be. I just need to get the dates and the times and all that so I show up. Important pieces like that. And I'll be doing PowerShell with Office 365 for those folks. If you're in the Oklahoma City area, or can drive there. Once I figure out when this is, you should drive over. Say, hey, talk to Bruce. He's a good guy. They've got mules there. Bruce has some mules. If you've never met a mule, this is a great opportunity to check that off your bucket list. Hang out with a mule. You can do that all in Oklahoma City. That's sometime in June. There's discussions in the chat room about whether I am the D word or not. Just remember, I invited you into Slack, or Lori invited you into Slack. I can kick you out of Slack. So there are certain acceptable practices in the Todd Klindt Slack channel. And one of them is not to call me the D word, Jerry LaCanoe. I can see you from here. And I'm going to give it the thumbs down. There we go. Lynn's going to be there, so that's awesome at the Oklahoma City thing. The next thing I got going on, and I do know when this is June 27th through the 30th, though all of my stuff is just on June 29th, I think. And but that is SPTechCon. So you can go to sptechcon.com and sign up for that. June 27th through the 30th, I'll be doing my PowerShell with SharePoint Online session, and also Azure Active Directory. So those are two of my favorite things right now. So you'll be able to check that out. Those are both on Wednesday. I don't know when I'm flying in, sometime Monday or Tuesday. I don't know. But if you're going to be at SPTechCon, come find me. I would love to chat with you and hang out, say hey, and all that. And then finally, in October, the SharePoint Exchange Forum, Seth is in Stockholm, and I'll be talking there. Jorn and I haven't figured out exactly what I'll be doing there, but I'll be speaking to those folks. So, and I might have another thing coming up. I haven't finalized the date on it, but another thing in June that I'll be talking about. I got to get the dates finalized with some folks, but when I do, once that is finalized, I will get that blogged, but I will have that information by next week. I forgot all about it. I should have had it this week, but something else to look forward to. Another chance for you to hang out with me and malign me publicly in Slack or GoToWebinar or whatever the medium ends up being. More heckling and mocking opportunities for your pleasure. Slack room hooligans, stick around for a while. I'll be in here. We'll be sorting this out. I'll see you guys next week. You folks here on the podcast, I will. I'll be here next week. Hopefully there'll be fewer fire drills, but I'll see you next week for number 294. Have a good week.